40 years ago, a pastor made a covenant with something that was not God. Last month, that covenant expired, and he sat me down and told me, in his own words, exactly what he gave to start it. I want to say it plainly because I have spent 40 years saying it carefully, and carefully has not helped me. I was 24 years old when a man approached me with an offer. At the time, I had spent almost 5 years praying for opportunities that never came. I watched other young ministers move forward while every door in front of me stayed shut. I prayed harder, I fasted longer, but nothing around me changed. It was at this time this man appeared. Our conversation made me realize that he had been watching me. He said I was standing outside a door that was never going to open the way I was trying to open it. And then he made the statement I have never forgotten. He said, "I can give you access." At first, it sounded harmless. He wasn't talking about money. He wasn't talking about fame. He was talking about everything I had spent years asking God for. A ministry, influence, and recognition. The ability to walk into a room and know people would listen. It got to a point where he told me what needed to be done. And he said I needed to pay a price for that. And that it had to be something living. Something that genuinely mattered to me. Something I could never replace. The moment he said those words, I knew what he meant. I was engaged. We had been together for almost 2 years. Everyone around us already treated us like husband and wife. She was the only person who believed in me before there was anything to believe in. Before the sermons, before the invitations, before the ministry, she was there. And before he even finished explaining the agreement, I knew he was talking about her. For 3 days, I tried to convince myself I would say no. I acted and went about my days normal as always. But every time I was alone, I found myself thinking about the offer. Not because I wanted to lose her, but because I wanted what had been promised. That is the part people never understand. The temptation was not the sacrifice. The temptation was the future. The future looked so close, I felt like I could touch it. A week later, I was taken to a meeting. This didn't seem like what people talk about all the time, but that was the part that deceives a lot of people. This wasn't dramatic. No chanting. Just a small room, a handful of people, and one question. He looked at me and asked if I agreed. That was all. One question, one answer. I remember being surprised by how ordinary it felt. I had expected something frightening, something unforgettable. Instead, it felt like a business agreement. He asked, and I said yes. That single word changed everything. I went home that night and slept better than I had slept in months. That is the truth. The relief came before the consequence. Weeks later, she was dead. No questions from anyone on the outside. No suspicion. No investigation. People gathered around me as the grieving young pastor who had lost the woman he loved. And I was grieving. I need to be honest about that. I loved her. I mourned her. I stood beside her grave and felt genuine loss. But underneath that loss, there was something else. Something I refused to admit for 40 years. Underneath the grief, I felt the door opening. Underneath the tears, I felt power. And standing there at her graveside, I knew the agreement had worked. You see, the price did not arrive as pain. It arrived as help. Within a year of that night, I was preaching somewhere new every week. Within 5 years, I had my own church, and within that first year, before I even had a church of my own, I had started hearing things. I don't know how else to say it. A thought that fell slightly outside of me. The first time, it was a name, a member of a small congregation I had just begun preaching to, and a detail about his life I had absolutely no way of knowing. I said it out loud during the service, and the man broke down completely in front of everyone. He was certain God had spoken to him through me. I felt the door again, the same feeling as the graveside, and I understood in that moment that this was going to be the rest of my life, and I welcomed it. I want to be honest about something else too. I questioned it. Of course, I questioned it, especially in the early years. Where is this coming from? But every time I found language for it. Discernment, a word of knowledge, a gift of the Spirit. The church already has language for things like this. Sitting there, ready, and that language let me stop looking directly at what it actually was. I built 40 years of ministry partly out of borrowed vocabulary. Words that meant one thing when other men used them, and something else entirely when I did. That is the part I want people to understand. The price wasn't a moment, it was a maintenance. Every year, not constantly, but at intervals. There were things required of me to keep what I had been given flowing. Some of what I did over those 40 years, I did to other people without their knowledge in order to keep what had been given to me. From the outside, it looked like the normal politics of running a large ministry. Who got promoted, who got dismissed, who got prayed for publicly, and who quietly didn't. From the inside, almost none of it was what it looked like. Did it get easier? No, it got more efficient. Those aren't the same thing. Efficient means I stopped feeling it as much. It doesn't mean it costs less. It means I'd gotten better at not counting. I saw the man who first approached me only once more in all those years. 5 years ago, he called it the final renewal, and it was the only one thing that frightened me, because for the first time he told me what was coming at the end. He told me there was a date, that the agreement had a term, 40 years. I had agreed to it at 24 without understanding what 40 years meant. It sounds like forever, which is the same as sounding like nothing, but you live inside it. Every year that passes, the number gets smaller and it gets louder. By year 30, it was in the room with me constantly, and by year 35, I couldn't preach about eternity without my hands shaking, because I knew exactly how much of my own eternity I had left to negotiate with. He told me what would happen when the term ended, that the protection ends, not gradually, at a specific hour on a specific day, and everything the covenant had been holding back from me for 40 years would no longer be held back. I asked him what he meant by holding back. He looked at me for a long time before he answered. He said, "There are consequences owed to a man who has lived the way I had lived, spiritually. The covenant didn't remove those consequences. It deferred them. For 40 years, I had been living a life that should have collapsed under its own weight a dozen times over. And it didn't, because something was holding the weight off me. From that day, 5 years ago, I began counting down to a date I had been given 40 years earlier, without ever really believing it would come. It came 4 weeks ago. I didn't sleep that night. I sat alone and I waited. Some part of me hoped that nothing would happen, that 40 years had simply been a story I told myself, and the date would pass, and I would feel foolish, and that would be the end of it. At the exact hour he told me, something left. I can't really describe it the way I described the voices arriving over the years. This was the opposite. A presence leaving. I felt it go, and the moment it was gone, the room felt larger and colder. The way a house feels the moment after someone you depended on has died. Since that night, things have begun happening to my health, to my family, to everything I built. I prefer not to describe most of it, not because I'm protecting myself, but because some of it involves people who never agreed to be part of this, and they deserve better than to become details in my confession. What I will say is that it has been precise, as if whatever was being held back 40 years had been waiting patiently with a list. Am I afraid? Not of dying. I've been ready to die for a long time, in some ways, readier than most people my age. I think because I've spent 40 years aware of exactly what I was going to have to answer for. What I'm afraid of is what I've started calling the accounting, the specific form this takes. Whether the people around me, my wife, my family, people who never said yes to anything are caught inside it with me. That is the only thing I ask God for. Not for it to stop, just for it to come only for me. Do I believe I've been forgiven? Every day for 40 years, I asked, and I believe, I have to believe that forgiveness was given the first time I asked, decades ago. But forgiveness and consequences are not the same conversation. God forgave me, I believe that completely, and the covenant still had 40 years on it, regardless. Forgiveness doesn't cancel a contract made with someone else. There's one more thing, the hardest thing. In 40 years of ministry, people were genuinely helped, genuinely comforted. I watched marriages survive. I watched people get free from addictions. I watched broken families sit in the same pew again after years apart. And some of that, I believe, was real. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how something built on what I built it on produced any good at all. That not knowing is going to outlive whatever is coming for me physically. I'm certain of that. And I have never said that sentence out loud to anyone, including God, if I'm being honest, even in prayer, until now. When I asked him what he would say to the young man he used to be, he sat quietly for a long time. He said, if I could go back, I would choose obscurity. Not because obscurity is easier, not because struggle is pleasant, but because there are prices that look small when they are far away and become unbearable when the bill finally arrives. For 40 years, he looked successful. People admired him, trusted him. They wanted what he had, but they never saw the cost. And that is why I'm sharing this story. Because some doors are not blessings, some opportunities are not from God, and some shortcuts take people exactly where they wanted to go, only to leave them wishing they had never started the journey. 40 years ago, a pastor made a choice. Last month, he told me he would spend the rest of his life regretting it. The lesson is simple. Be careful what you are willing to trade for success, because every covenant eventually comes due.